So I'm Kate Hayden. ACOM introduced me earlier. I've been with the Division of Energy Assistance a little over a month now, and I am the regional liaison for Regions 3 and 5. So if I haven't had the opportunity to meet some of you all, please stop and say hello if you get a chance over the next few days. I also wanted to bring the survey up again because you each have these in your packet, one for today, and each section you're supposed to rate each of us individually, so I wanted you to be conscientious of these surveys in your folders as well. So I'm going to deliver the first half of this session on monitoring models, and then my colleague Joji is going to deliver the second half. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the why, and then Joji is going to discuss some of the how. So if you're a new coordinator, this is critical to you, as during this session we will help you determine your role and responsibility as a LIHEAP grantee in both fiscal and program monitoring. And then we are also going to look at some state monitoring best practices so you can get some ideas for various models that you can employ if you want to enhance the model that you're using now. So before we go on to the next slide, since we just finished lunch, we're going to have a little quiz, and the winner gets a Starbucks gift card. So get ready, because the first person who answers correctly gets it. So hope you're a quick reader. So are you ready? Which of the following is a recommended monitoring practice for a subgrantee? Oh. That was quick. Don't worry, we'll have one more quiz before this is over. So yes, the correct answer is B. Subgrantee is monitored by another entity such as the state or another vendor for both program and fiscal activities. So grantees may hire an outside entity to perform monitoring, but those entities should not oversee or be related to the subgrantees they are monitoring. So if you feel like you do need to delegate your monitoring responsibilities to an outside entity, that's okay. You just have to be conscientious that that conflict of interest doesn't appear. And you can delegate many of your activities to a community action association, but you should still maintain the monitoring at the state level or with an independent contractor. So this is just a little mini agenda for this session and what we're going to talk about. And we're going to go over program integrity and discuss the LIHEAP statute and regulations. We're going to talk about our roles in federal monitoring, and then your grantee responsibilities as a state or tribe or territory in monitoring, and then we'll look at some different state models. So this is the section of the LIHEAP statute that basically says that LIHEAP grantees will maintain good financial controls. It's also known as Assurance 10. And the part that I want to note especially is that it says about the fourth row down, including procedures for monitoring and for monitoring the assistance provided under this title. So it's very clearly stated that we are responsible for monitoring. And this is the program integrity rule. And this is the part of the block grant that governs LIHEAP, the block grant regulations that govern LIHEAP. And it basically says that the systems must be established to prevent, detect, correct, and correct waste, fraud, and abuse. And that is by clients, vendors, and administering agencies. So that can be done in many different ways. And then this part of the statute requires that we at OCS come out from time to time and monitor the states and tribes and territories to ensure compliance with the policies. That's why we come out and sit in your offices for a week at times. And that's the exact language right there. The Secretary shall conduct in several states in each fiscal year investigations of the use of funds received by the states under this title in order to evaluate compliance with the provisions of this title. And this little graph is showing the 4 categories of grantee responsibilities. So they are define, implement, monitor, and administer the program. So you need to define the regulations and policies of your individual programs, implement the program through training and policy manuals and operations manuals, procedures manuals, and the like, through contracts with your vendors, your subgrantees. You need to monitor the systems and the data, conduct site visits, monitor the reports, review the reports, and then administer. So many of these activities can be delegated out to subcontractors, but the responsibility to develop these processes for defining, implementing, administering, and monitoring the activities still falls on the state to do so, especially the monitoring we're talking about in this module. So here's another quiz. Who is responsible for reporting suspected fraud, waste, and abuse? Is it A, E, all of the above? Okay, we got one more quiz. Oh, was it E back there? Let's wait till the last. There's one more quiz. I only have 2 prizes, so we have to be on a budget here. So yes, it is E. We are all responsible for ensuring that the systems and protocols are in place to report these. It should be up to state staff, subgrantee staff, clients, vendors. Everyone should have the opportunity, and there should be an avenue for reporting any suspected fraud, waste, or abuse. And this slide actually brings up another good point, that can be through your contracts with the subgrantees, on application disclosures or within the application itself. It can be on the website, can be in the policy manuals, in vendor agreements, letters to the vendors, document various different ways to ensure that those avenues exist. So the 2012 report of the LIHEAP Program Integrity Working Group established these critical components of sound fiscal management. So the report has established that state fiscal controls, policies and procedures are in place to comply with the federal regulations, that there should be local agency fiscal controls to ensure compliance with the state and federal, and then local agency training to ensure that proper payments and administrative errors don't happen. We can prevent those or address those if they do happen. Everybody knows that they're a major nightmare when they happen, so it's sort of that saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you can prevent those, it's much easier to take care of. And then vendor fiscal controls, that can be done through the Secretary of State's website that has a list of all vendors that are debarred from participating in federal programs, also through the federal list of debarred vendors, and then also through your various internal vendor controls. And then also through benefit payment and tracking to make sure that the systems are in place to properly allocate, track, and verify payments, detect and address duplicate and improper payments, and to be proactive rather than reactive. So the same report by the LIHEAP working group found that as a best practice, states should require a contract or the contract that we should all have, all states should probably have with their local agencies. The contract should establish rights and responsibilities of local agencies and ensure that they follow generally accepted accounting principles. This is sort of what we talk about in the Single Audit Act, requiring all recipients of federal dollars to use generally accepted accounting principles. And then also that states should require a local agency to develop a comprehensive local plan for fulfilling responsibilities. So this is just a best practice that the working group has found, and we'll give a shout out to Oregon here because they are using a good template that states could use to have their local entities submit a plan to them detailing, you know, how many trainings they're going to have with staff per year, what their outreach plans are, what kind of activities they might pursue under Assurance 15. So you can ask your entities to submit a local plan to you. Think of it as, you know, your version of the application that you also send us your plan. So each state, tribe, and territory receiving LIHEAP agrees to certain assurances. You all know the 16 assurances that you sign off on, and one of those is that there will be sufficient internal and administrative controls. One is that there will be effective monitoring procedures, and one is compliance with the Single Audit Act. And these are all part of Assurance 10. And so when you've made an assurance, that means that you're legally bound to something. So this is kind of saying don't just rubber stamp everything, okay. We need to go out into these local entities and ensure that they are doing everything sufficiently, and that means that you're doing a good job at effective monitoring. But what does really effective monitoring mean? How do states provide effective monitoring? This is just one workflow here. We talk about internal controls here, taking a look at the subgrantee's procedures, detection and monitoring. So this could be a risk assessment, doing a desk review of your various subgrantees, and deciding, you know, based on files or case files or reports that they've submitted, invoices, maybe a short list of who you could monitor that year, and then going out and doing the monitoring, going out on site, investigating, looking further, taking a good look into those different documents. And then if there is an issue, to develop a corrective action for the entities that you're reviewing. And this includes both, you know, fiscal and program side. So, and then once you have issued the corrective action, you know, follow up and see if that's been actually taken, or provide some training and technical assistance on making sure that the corrective actions have actually been implemented. Iris is going to be here to talk a little bit more about corrective action plans at a later module during this event, training event. So this slide is actually targeted at states that transfer weatherization funds to another state agency. And these are the questions that need to be answered. So the grantee needs to ask the partner agency that they're transferring the funds to, you know, are you timely obligating the LIHEAP funds to meet obligation requirements? Are you adequately monitoring your own subgrantees? Are you using LIHEAP funds for allowable purposes? Are you following your own policies and procedures for administration of the LIHEAP funds? Accurately reporting the information to grantee needs in order to complete the required OCS forms. So I guess we see sometimes that once funds are transferred to another agency, it can be easy to forget that we still have to go out and monitor, that they are doing their monitoring of their own subgrantees. They still have to do that. That's important to remember. This slide is going to emphasize the importance of monitoring early. So if at all possible, I know it's convenient at times to wait until the program year is over to go monitor your subgrantees, but if you can monitor during the program year, you can often catch problems that are arising and early on and correct them before it becomes, you know, a reoccurring systematic problem. So the corrective action can be put in place before the program ends. And then also you can identify fraud, waste, and abuse early on in the program, and that helps ensure compliance with the LIHEAP laws and regulation. So it's important to remember that monitoring of LIHEAP is required by law, and it should be done early. So now that I've covered some of the why, Joji's going to discuss some of the how.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll have to be very good in doing this. Otherwise, you can remind me. This is always my problem. Okay, I am now assigned on the monitoring plan development. Okay, this might be a little tongue twister, especially that the state plan is due in September. So this topic is all about the monitoring. So if you would remember when you submitted the annual plan last year through OLDC, this monitoring plan, for some of us, we asked this especially in section 10 of the plan. Do you remember that? Okay, anyway, so the monitoring plan is one of the areas that we federal staff also look into when we visit you in your states. But this topic pertains to the state monitoring plan on how you would be monitoring your subgrantees, your partners, like, you know, we know that some states pass through the funding for weatherization to their partners. And we have seen some examples that, you know, once the state passed through the money to a partner, like a different department in the state, they don't monitor. And we have seen this kind of practices, but, you know, we are starting to emphasize this, that, you know, the monitoring, you would need to monitor as well your interagency partner. So that's why the development of a monitoring plan is very, very important. And we do understand that as a block grant, we don't provide a lot of guidance on how you will do your plan, but there are some basic items or criteria on how you would be able to develop the plan. So let's see. So each grantee should develop the monitoring plan based on program characteristics, requirements, and goals. We fully understand that each state has different characteristics, population, program design, and all of that. In fact, we thought that if there are 50 states in United States, there are 50 types of monitoring plan that all of us at the federal has to deal with and has to digest each time we go to your place, which is a fun thing, by the way. The state LAHI plan should include the plan for monitoring, and I said a while ago that this should be part of the Section 10. I particularly will be looking for this when I review your plan in September. So what is an effective monitoring plan? And this is what I was saying, that there are certain criteria that you may want to include in your, when you develop your monitoring plan. You could examine and test what is actually happening in the administration of the LAHI plan. So, for instance, you can review areas of the LAHIP administration at the local level or in your subgrantees, such as how do they conduct their outreach, how do they conduct or do their intake, how do they determine their benefits, payment of benefits, vendor agreements, and others. So those are some of the areas that you could review and test. So you can do random review, you can do document review, and all of those kind of strategies. You can also look at how they apply the state policies in relation to this area. So since this morning, we have been hammering the thought that the state should develop their own policies. Because as a block grant, again, you know, we don't give you or we don't prescribe specific guidance on how you will run your program. But we will depend on your policy. So this is not very much different with the monitoring. So we will depend on your policy on how you would like to do your monitoring, and we will monitor you based on the policy that you have written, and if you are complying with those kind of, with your own policy. You can also test client application, benefit payment, so, you know, actual transactions, actual vouchers that were issued, whether they follow the benefit matrix that you have done. So those are the areas that you could test. And after you have identified after you have reviewed and identified the issues that you have seen with the subgrantees and the partners, you can identify the findings and concerns that needs corrective action. So it's very important that you don't only identify those issues, but you ask the subgrantees or your partners what would be their corrective actions, and this could be part of the ongoing discussion, your training, and technical assistance. So, okay. What is the monitoring plan? I mean, what are the contents? What are the possible areas that you could include in your monitoring plan? So you could, let me just put it down here. Oops, there you go. Made a mistake. Okay, so your plan should include verifying qualified benefits for eligible clients. So this means clients should get what they are supposed to. So based on their income, based on the criteria that you have developed under the benefit matrix. The benefits go to the right vendor and when it is supposed to. So the timeliness of the issuance of this benefit, especially to your vendors, is very critical. Because if it's not timely, then it affects the delivery of that energy to your population. In case of life-threatening crisis, again, this is another area that we have been hammering over and over again. And I know you are really quite tired of hearing from us, but in life-threatening crisis, which we call the 18-hour crisis, the benefits should be issued, or if it could not be issued right away within 18 hours, at least there should be some sort of an intervention plan. So what are the intervention plan that, normally we have seen across the state? So for instance, if a person in crisis needs a house because, a home, because the energy is cut off, then, you could possibly refer them to shelter. Or some states provide a stock of, blankets, those kind of things, so that they could deliver it or give it to those who are in crisis. In other words, the requirement really is not to provide the benefit within 18 hours, because we do understand that there are certain circumstances that may prevent you from doing that, but at least an intervention is carried on or provided to the clients to ensure that they are safe and they are well taken care of. So referrals will be very key here, and partnership with the community-based agencies. Of course, the 48 hours is what we consider the non-life-threatening crisis. So again, even though this is just a 14, this is not life-threatening, at least another intervention or other intervention could also be provided. And of course, it varies what the state's policy is on the delivery of the benefits. Some are processed within 10 to 30 days. So this can be monitored by the state as well. So if the policy is the benefit has to be issued in 10 days, then the subgrantee should be able to abide to it. Do clients know how to call? So do you have a 1-800 number? Do you have a centralized number where client could call? For instance, where to apply, how to apply, and all those information, and follow-up of application. Let's say, the client was advised to go back. Do they have, did you give them a number to call to follow up? And who can be followed up? I mean, who's the assigned staff who can give them that kind of information? And even complaints. Where can the public or the client call to complain? If, for instance, if he has a problem with the timeliness of the delivery of the service, or he has a complaint about the vendor, or other related complaints. Do local agencies know what to do if something is wrong, especially on emergency cases? Okay, does your local agency know who to call and what to do? Such as those, is also those cases related to waste, fraud, and abuse. So does your local agency know the process? What is the process of the state? So, or do they understand the procedure on how they will process calls on waste, fraud, and abuse? Okay, here are some of the. This slide talks about the monitoring activities. So what are your activities when we refer back to monitoring? One is the evaluation of subgrantee. Most state subgrantees perform their internal monitoring. What is an internal monitoring of the LAHIP intake and program operations? So examples of the internal monitoring will be, for instance, one intake staff will perform the intake of a client, and then another intake staff will review the information. So this is more like what we call peer review. So one intake person handles the application, and then the other one look at the information or the actual application processed by that intake worker. Or another example would be an intake staff member of a subgrantee will perform the intake of a client, and then another worker, independent of the intake process, meaning she's not hired or she's not doing any intake process, review the work of the other person. So this is another example of a peer review, but it's a different type. So, and another example, and we have seen this a lot, is a supervisor doing quality assurance in all the work of the intake persons. And we have seen some example that they even sign off on the application or in the system if it's a database, like, if they have a centralized database. So the supervisor check the work of the intake worker. Or some of them, we even saw examples of like, they go through the files and then they randomly do a quality control or checks. So those are some of the examples that they do when it comes to monitoring. Now, how do you track the monitoring results? So it is important that, grantee should follow up and ensure sub-grantee takes timely and appropriate action on all the issues for LIHEAP. So, in a minute. So this is, the grantee tracks their own monitoring results. So after monitoring or tracking the results, the management issue a decision for audit findings or for the monitoring, the actual monitoring. Sometimes, we always, interchange the audit and the monitoring. So some states would call their monitoring as audit, but that's really a monitoring. This is quite different from what we call the single audit, which is a different process and more intensive. So, but then after the monitoring, there is a management decision issued, and it's usually a form of a memo saying, here are the findings, here are the issues that we want you to correct. And, and then you are asked to, the sub-grantees are asked to give the state a response within a certain period of time. And this becomes a topic for further training and for further technical assistance. And of course, as previously mentioned, if there are some erroneous issues, then these are well noted. Just to plug in, on day 3 of the LIHEAP conference, we will discuss corrective action plans and sub-grantee risk assessment. So we have that separate session. Okay, now how are states monitoring? So these are some of the models that we have seen in the field. Okay. So monitoring procedures vary widely among states. So some states may conduct annual on-site reviews of every local agency, or they may schedule this for 2 to 3 years. So, and of course, it all depends on the budget and the number of agencies or, sub-grantees. Some states do risk assessment and review agencies determined to be at risk more often. So, for instance, if you did monitoring and then you saw a few agencies having the same issues over and over, so the grantee or the state usually conducts more intensive risk assessment, or more often they will schedule the same sub-grantee for monitoring. So if you're doing like once a year monitoring, this sub-grantee may likely get 2 or more a year, depending upon the issue. States also may conduct periodic desk reviews. Desk reviews will be like looking at the computer if you have a centralized database, looking at the reports. And I understand all of you might be doing this, like, reports could be in terms of the data being submitted to you, profiles and, application completed, as well as the invoices that are being submitted to the fiscal. So this is what you call the report or review. And some states would do this on a monthly basis or quarterly or every 6 months. And of course, monitoring responsibilities differ as well by states. So some states the LAHIP program staff are assigned as monitors as well. So for instance, if you have your LAHIP staff, sometimes because of budget restriction, then this same LAHIP program staff conducts the monitor. It's similar to what we're doing. We are assigned as operations staff, so we are liaisons, but at the same time, we also handle the federal monitoring of the state. So it's similar to what the states are doing. And while other states work with their fiscal or even a separate monitoring unit, I think we saw this example in Mississippi where they have a separate monitoring unit and it's backed up by the fiscal division. So they have a different setup and as well as a different procedure on how to do this. But the Mississippi LAHIP staff had been closely working with the fiscal and the monitoring in terms of the issues that they have noted. Okay, the monitoring by an outside entity, this means the state or the grantee hires an outside agency. So this could be an independent audit firm or an independent monitoring group. We've seen this kind of example in Michigan, for instance. They have a separate, they hired an independent audit who conducts the monitoring of their local agencies. As well as Pennsylvania. Do we have somebody here from Pennsylvania? Okay. Would you like to share your strategy on monitoring about hiring an independent audit?
And then the counties that had the highest errors on an annual basis, they go out and they visit them again the following year. Those who have lower incidence of reported issues, they go out every 3 years as a minimum and conduct a report on them.
Okay, great. Thank you. The advantage of hiring an independent monitoring or audit is, we have that impression that it's more objective that way because this attached from the day-to-day administration of the program, so they have a different perspective. But, it depends upon the budget, of course, and also the decision of your, state government. And when a state or a grantee hires an outside entity, they follow what we call the procurement policy of the state. So it's not just the LAHIP, but what the procurement policy or procedure of the state. So normally, because an independent audit is a contract in most forms, so they go through a procurement process. So for instance, if your plan for your monitoring plan is to conduct a monitoring early on, so that means the RFP, the procurement RFP should go out like very much earlier, maybe like even before the program starts. So that's how the process, because it can't be at the time when you're already monitoring. So, okay. The monitoring this is another topic about the conflict of interest. So how do we gauge that there is a conflict of interest? One example here that we have seen is, am I correct? The state subgrants 99% of LAHIP to a community action agency. Why is there a conflict of interest there? It's because the state contracts or subgrant 99% of the LAHIP fund, meaning that this state CAA is administering the LAHIP in partnership with the state. And therefore, the sub-grantees of the CAA are the local agencies who are members of the CAA. So how does it become a conflict of interest? This happens when a board of director of one of the sub-grantee, a member CAA is also a board member of the state CAA, where the board of director has some leeway in terms of a decision making. So, it's obviously a conflict of interest. So, and I guess there are other examples that, we could think of. Does anyone have an idea what other conflict of interest they have seen? Okay. Sorry, I don't have a candy. All right. So it is the responsibility of the state to monitor its sub-grantees, so whichever way. And, also some states have not done financial monitoring. So I think early on, the best practice is to have both the fiscal and the program monitoring. I understand that some states would rely on the single audit or on the audit process. But, I think we are looking more into this, that we are emphasizing that the monitoring should be both the program, because we have to ensure that the sub-grantees are following the statute or the policies of the state on the different aspects of the LAHIP administration, and especially tracking the funds. So where are the funds going? Are the benefits that were included in the plan or in the benefits matrix goes to the correct population based on the criteria that you have developed? And also, it's important that the benefits provided or to the vendors are also monitored, because it's also very important that the vendors are, because the vendors are the direct provider of the energy assistance. So this is another area where the monitoring is essential. Okay, here's another example on how state monitors. So for instance, they have a dedicated person on the state staff responsible for training and monitoring a particular set of sub-grantees. So if there are 30 sub-grantees, then there is only one person dedicated for that kind of monitoring. So an example here is, for instance, Montana breaks the state into geographic regions. And there are 4 to 5 staff that do all the necessary monitoring for sub-grantees in a region. And it's not only monitoring, but other activities like training, technical assistance. They also do quality assurance. They also do contracts, invoices, and the primary point for the region. This also would work for states with condensed population. So for instance, one metropolitan area is only assigned to one program staff who handles both the TA and the monitoring. Another model is some grantees have chosen to have one particular person, on staff who is responsible for all the monitoring. So they specifically assign 1 or 2 people who can only handle monitoring. I think this is, Illinois has this kind of example, that they have assigned only 2 people who handles all the monitoring across the state. And they may be responsible for both program and the fiscal as well. So in other words, the skill set that the state will be looking for someone who can do this type of monitoring, they have to have like programmatic knowledge, skills, and as well as with fiscal, which is, I think, for me it's quite hard because I'm more programmatic. I'm not a fiscal person, but I believe that there are monitors who have that kind of set of skills. This is the team up state model. I think I discussed this previously, like some states teaming up with their fiscal division or internal monitoring unit, and I've said that Mississippi is one of the examples. So I'm just quoting some of the states that I already been to and I know or had been my grantee. So I apologize if I did not highlight some of the states, but you could raise your hand if you're doing this type of model. Okay. Okay, let's have this quiz. And I don't have, what do you call this? The Starbucks that Kate answered that. Feel free, okay? So which of these tasks am I able to delegate to a sub-grantee? Intake, benefit payments, weatherization, and outreach. All. Okay, very good. Thank you. So that's the correct answer. Okay, let's see. We're ending most of the discussion here. So this is just a summary. Okay, that its grantee should develop the monitoring plan. And again, each of us will be looking to see it in section 10 of your annual plan in September. Okay, and it should include all the criterias. I mean, that's the list criteria that we could think of, but you could add more to it depending upon your characteristics. Okay? So an effective monitoring plan will therefore examine what is actually happening in the administration of the LAHI program. You can review the program implementation and determine what's, I can see that. I'm sorry. And determine what should or did not happen. You can identify findings and concerns that need corrective actions to address going forward in the program. And here you go, Q&A. Okay. If you have further question, I think we have a session later, right? Or we can probably, you know, get one or two questions from the floor. Okay, do we have a break? Okay, I think we're ready for a break. Thank you very much.